Hello and welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. It's Tuesday. That means it's book day. It's also May 20th. So Original Sin is out today. That is the book by Jake Tapper from CNN and Alex Thompson from Axios. That is the third book in the series of books taking a pretty harsh look at the end of the Biden administration and the cognitive decline that was hidden from view. Yet somehow, oddly enough, all of us here at Fox News were well aware of it for a long, long time, including in 2020 when we were saying this isn't going to age well. And in fact, on my now defunct Fox Business show, I bet a Democrat strategist in, I believe it was 2022, that Joe Biden would not be the nominee in 2024. I bet her $10,000. She took the bet. The problem is I can't remember who it was. Maybe I'm the one in cognitive decline. Doesn't matter now because they were all guilty of it. They all knew how bad it was. And, we were told that if we dared question his cognitive state, whether or not he had something like dementia or Alzheimer's or even Parkinson's, which a lot of people went on record in the Tapper-Thompson book and said, seeing Joe Biden up close reminded me of my father who has Alzheimer's or my grandfather who had Parkinson's. Whatever the case was, whatever neurological condition people had seen. And, it's like, of course, people age, they forget things, but it's a different category when you're up close and personal with someone you love who is really losing themselves due to one of these conditions. And that's obviously what we were seeing with the president. The book also goes into great detail about how his staff would manage his day, and everything was done between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. to make sure that he was sharp as an English muffin to take on the day. And he wasn't sharp. He was tired. He didn't have a strong voice. He couldn't walk very well. And it showed. It was also very obvious that the people around him who were scheduling and managing him so closely knew something was wrong. Why didn't these people come out sooner? Well, as I said on Gutfeld last night when Greg asked me about it, I called it political Munchausen by proxy. Which means that these people not only knew the president was sick, they kept him sick, they kept him tired because it kept him in office, and it benefited everybody. Because Jill Biden, as we have long discussed, she was the beneficiary of the actual presidency, not the lead up to the presidency, not the threat of power that enriched other members of the Biden family, namely James and Hunter Biden, to the tune of millions of dollars, which has been proven over and over again. Just the idea of a Biden presidency looming was enough for them to line their pockets. Jill didn't do that. She waited for Air Force One and the gowns and the parties and the state dinners and the trappings and the access and the excess and everything else that she was afforded. So that benefited her. All the people who made up the presidential committee, they were the ones who were pulling the strings. They were the ones who were setting the agenda. They were the ones clearly authoring the executive orders and the pardons and everything else. And they just needed Joe to stay there and mostly stay quiet. And so they had to so carefully orchestrate everything he was doing until it all fell apart. Well, it fell apart because he was pressed really hard in debate prep, and they just couldn't continue the ruse. So the curtain lifted. We saw that Oz was just a guy, a weak guy, an old guy, a guy with some sort of a condition, making it difficult for him to remember that dead people were no longer living, and forgetting that once living people were in fact dead. So as the world watched in horror at the debate that Jake Tapper moderated in June of last year, they saw that the president was a shell of himself, and everything that they had managed, everything that they had orchestrated was all a big lie. And that's when it came crashing down. It didn't have to come to that point.
Don't go anywhere. More Kennedy Saves the World right after this.
Now, on Friday, you have the Robert Hur audio leaked from the interview where he called him an elderly man, a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. And, and that was actually the very softened reason for why Hur wasn't going to charge him, because he said, a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory would play sympathetically in front of a jury, and they probably wouldn't convict him. And, so Hur, of course, was attacked as a right-wing shill. Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson took issue with that in their book because they said, actually, he was doing the president quite a big favor by softening the language around what was really going on. And then once we heard the audio, and this was a sitting president who couldn't remember, why he didn't run for president, who became president, when Donald Trump was elected, and when his son died. It was pretty tragic, and they ran out of excuses, but it never should have gotten to the point where he was so managed by committee, and it just a convenient vegetable pawn for all of these people to maintain their access. It's really sickening what people will do to be in proximity to power. It makes them absolutely crazy. That is not an excuse. That does not let them off the hook, because this was the establishment, and the establishment will do whatever it can to fight for and maintain power. So when you hear people within the establishment saying, well, we have to look forward, we have to look past this. No, they were the ones that were part of all of this. You can't tell me that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer didn't know that Joe Biden had devolved into the state that he was in a majority of the time. They absolutely knew. And now they're the ones trying to gloss over it, saying, don't worry, you can trust us. Let's move forward. Well, why would you move forward with that team? Why would you move forward with anyone who was close to the president for so long? Because after the Hur tapes come out, they knew the book was going to be released today. So conveniently, Sunday night, we got the diagnosis that they had been holding on to for political reasons for a long time. So the post-presidency for the last at least 3 presidents has been very, very fruitful. And, presidents ride off into the sunset and, they drive up to the bank where the teller just shoves wheelbarrows of cash into balloons into the back seats of their station wagons. And then they ride off and they're multi-millionaires. Well, that was not going to be the case with the Biden presidency if these books continued to come out, because that became the cash cow for once compromised journalists. So they were holding on to the news of his prostate cancer, which is tragic news. You don't want anyone to go through that. It's like he's still someone's grandpa. He's still someone's father. He's still someone's husband. Yes, he is an egomaniac. And yes, much of this is still his responsibility. But I don't wish him ill. I don't wish his family sadness. I don't, the grieving process that begins when someone gets a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, I don't wish that on anyone. But they knew what was happening. And either they knew he was sick and they hid it while he was president, which is completely unethical, or they did what they assert in Original Sin, which is they didn't test for it. Because if you don't have a diagnosis, as they said, you don't have to disclose anything. And so even though Joe Biden had urinary symptoms probably for a long, long time, and there are doctors from MSNBC to CNN to our own Dr. Mark Siegel who said this kind of prostate cancer malingers for years. You have symptoms for years. At 82 years old, you would absolutely get a diagnosis, and he probably did. And they were lying about it, just like they were lying about his neurological condition and everything else, which makes his presidency, especially the last 2 years of it, a total sham. And I'm sorry, but the criticism is fair. It's pointed. It may feel political, but in this country at this time, politics is definitely a contact sport for which you need very sharp elbows. And Joe Biden, unfortunately, had grown very, very soft. Where do we go from here? Probably not to the bank. I don't think the teller has anything for a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory, but a sympathy card and an empty wheelbarrow. This has been Kennedy Saves the World. I'm Kennedy.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.
Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.